short time, they will pick it up. That's how a lot of people in foreign countries learn English. They're watching American television.
Yeah, that's true.
And you just dropped that part about summer camp in a Caribbean island. I call that one of the secrets of enhancing or improving your child's education. The museum is another one. Museum courses.
Yes. You take all those opportunities. I live here in Washington, D.C., and there are many people in Washington that have never been to the Kennedy Center. I took a young woman who is at Howard University, grew up in Washington, D.C., and she had never been to the Kennedy Center. She didn't know there's an opera house, a symphony hall, and a theater, for plays in the State Building.
The last question that I have is the value of black children getting black history in the home, and what approach or what books might be starter points for families beginning to make their children aware of our history. Why is it important in the first place?
I don't know the name of the series anymore, but there have been several series of black children's literature, black children's literature. They talk about Harriet Tubman, they talk about Loretta Scott King, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and there's a whole series of these books, and they're written at probably the third grade level of reading. So a third grade level, a kid can read them. And you have to go to a bookstore. There are black bookstores you can go to, and you ask for that series of books, and you'll find them. Sometimes you find them in used bookstores too.
Is this the Doc? Is this the comic books Golden Age?
No, the comic books are okay, but these are actually books that have won Pulitzer Prizes and so on.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, they're hardback. They're only about, I would say, 10 pages.
Got it.
Maybe 15 or 20 pages, but they give a whole history of a very important character in African American history.
I know what you're talking about. The name is not coming to mind, but they're well done. They're well done introductions, and I would add 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro is good for the parent and the child.
Yes. Leroy, what is important in this is that you read to them, and then you start letting them read to you.
Okay.
You see, you read to them when they're like 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4. By 4 and a half, you point to the word in the book as you're reading, and in a couple of days, some stories you have to read over and over again, but one day they'll start reading it to you, because they've finally understood what the letters are, how they pull together, and how they make words and ideas.
Okay.
Now, one other thing, when you get high school kids, they need to improve their vocabulary, and they have to understand what good writing looks like. When something is written well, this is how it's written. The best way to do that is to get the New York Times and give it to your children, and you read it with them, or they have to read it to you. Now, some of you think the New York Times is very expensive, but let me tell you, there's a man right there in New York, and he was a shoe-shine man in a very large building. So he shined shoes all day long, and these white men take the New York Times and just lay it on the floor, lay it on the seat, because they're reading what they're reading. he would bring it home and have his children read it. And they develop vocabulary because the New York Times uses language that is high school level of vocabulary or first year college. Now that other little picture journals that you guys get in there, the little expos and all that, they're written for fifth grade readers. You see? It doesn't matter what you're reading as long as you're reading.
No, the little books and stuff we was talking about.
You're talking about you're talking about the tabloids.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tabloids. Yeah, they can read those. They're fine. They don't. You know, now you have to tell the children that you tell them. Now look, they're fairy tales.
Yeah.
This is an adult fairy tale.
Absolutely.
It's an adult fairy tale. So and so's wife has thrown him out, or she doesn't love him anymore, or there's a crisis. You say, well, these are fairy tales for adults, and you all laugh about them. And if it's a funny thing, they won't believe it. They'll laugh. They'll say, oh, it's a fairy tale. You see. But when you have them read the editorial, when you have one of your high school grandchildren read the editorial page of the New York Times, then you will develop a vocabulary and a writing style because they know what excellent writing is. They'll know how to, when they get ready to go to they'll be able to write reports, book reports. They'll be able to write essays. And if they have to write an essay to go to a school, a special school, they'll know how to write it because they'll know how paragraphs are constructed and how things are pulled together, where's an outline. They'll get all of that from that kind of reading. And you ask probing questions. You may not know the answer yourself, but you say, well, what's the outline in this? What's the main theme in this? Has it been repeated too many times? I had a little girl here yesterday, just graduated from high school, and she's writing her essay to try to get money to go to college. And she said, I, all through it. And I printed out her little speech, her little essay, and I gave her a red ballpoint pen. And I said, in these 2 pages, circle every time you see an I. There were 32 I's on 2 pages. I am this, I want this, I'm going to do this, and so on. And I asked her, I said, well, do you think that's too many I's? She said, well, how do I rephrase it? She had no idea how to say me or mine or what in place of I. It is my opinion that, or instead of I feel that.
Got it.
So you get rid of some of those I's. Does that make sense?
That brother. we had a medical doctor on last week, Dr. Velva Bowles. She's down in Louisiana, and her presentation dropped a bomb on the table, and you followed it with another bomb.
That's right.
I will say this, ask you this. This is the concluding question, Doc, and that is, divorcing ourselves from this subject that we have been discussing, the education of our grandchildren, what do you see that black people should be understanding today? And before you do that, explain to the table what an industrial psychologist is, what that person does, their value.
Okay, I'm both clinical / industrial. The industrial psychologist goes into an organization and looks at it from 2 perspectives. One perspective says, how does information go from one person to the other person? In other words, you might have someone come in and say, there are 3 shifts of janitors at this hospital. You don't need 3 shifts of janitors, you need 1 shift. And they fire 2 shifts and only have 1 shift. Well, that is not a person that is looking at that hospital system holistically, and all of the parts are not working together. They're not congruent. So what happens is, it's Saturday night, people come into emergency, shot, wounded, heart attack, so on. The emergency nurse has stabilized 3 beds, 3 patients. She needs to move them out of emergency and take them up to the ward. She calls the ward nurse. The ward nurse says, we have no beds. A nurse from emergency coming back down from that same floor, she says, I saw 3 empty rooms up there. Well, now you got a conflict between the emergency nurse and the ward nurse. She calls her back and says, I've got a bed for these 3 patients. And she says, I have no bed. And she says, my nurse just told me you have 4 empty rooms up there. All right, now what is the problem? The problem is you fired and had only 1 shift, the janitor. But if you had somebody on 3 shifts, even if it's only 1 person, the salary that that 1 person makes for 8 hours of janitorial work is not the cost of 1 hospital room. So the job was ineffective. Now, a good industrial psychologist pulled all those system things together. Now, in order to make those systems work, you have to work with the staff. And that's what Nichols does with my paradigm, the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. People have to work together and recognize that everyone doesn't solve problems in the same way. Everyone doesn't have the same set of values. And everyone doesn't use the same set of logic. So once you understand that there are differences, then you can work more efficiently with someone who is different from you. And then when your staff is a culturally competent staff in leadership, you can go back and correct all of the systemic things and make your system congruent. That's what an industrial psychologist does.
Some of these hospitals need that.
Got it. And the question that I had before that, before I had you answer the industrial piece, clinical industrial. Clinical means that you deal with people one-on-one, yes?
That I've done with, I can do psychological testing, I can do psychotherapy, I can do group therapy, I can do play therapy with small children. See, I've worked with schizophrenic. I worked in the hospital of the criminally insane. You see, so I'm in the prisons. I worked in state hospitals. All those where you have to work with patients that have mental health problems, depression, schizophrenia.
Every time you give an answer, you open the door to something else. But I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. But
Now, go ahead and ask what you have.
what? I'm sorry. What did you say?
Ask what you want to ask.
Yeah. In the criminally insane, what experience have you had going into an institution where a person was, quote, criminally insane, when you got in there they weren't?
No, these guys that are classified as criminally insane, in this particular prison, inside the prison, they had a hospital for the criminally insane.
Okay.
And criminally insane are these guys who eat people, kill them and eat them, or they tear out their eyes or entrails, or they rape and kill, or they, what else? Those are kinds of things. Yeah.
Dismember.
One guy there that he had to be put in a place by himself because if the other guy went to sleep before he did, the guy would wake up the next morning and he'd eaten his ear or, bitten a part of him off or something, or strangled him to death, or bit his throat like a vampire. We had one guy thought he was a vampire. And if he's ever around anybody too long, he would jump on them and start biting them in the neck.
Oh, crap.
So those are the criminally insane. They are really sick.
Yeah,
You heard about the guy in Massachusetts that was driving the lady around, had abducted her.
Yeah, yeah. No.
It said the article that I read said it took 9 police to subdue him.
Yeah.
he was
Well,
a monster.
they'll have to do the testing, but I would say that he's one of those criminally insane people.
Here in New York, and recently in Chicago. Here in New York, April 9th, a young lady, 26 years of age, her body parts were found spread out in Canarsie Park in Brooklyn. And in Chicago, the a dismembered young lady was found within the last week or so. Now, the murders are unsolved here in New York. I don't know about Chicago. But when that kind of thing, when you see that, when you hear about that kind of thing, what comes to your mind?
Well, very often those are extreme forms of schizophrenia and sort of a paranoid schizophrenia. And the voices tell them that it is that they're supposed to cut the evil spirit out of this person. And so they're and some will say that if you don't separate and put the body parts in different places, then they'll all come together and haunt you. So they keep apart, so that if the body tries to come together, it can't come together completely, because they have the tongue or the ear or some part of the individual. Sometimes they eat that part, so that incorporates in them, and then this spirit can never come back together to haunt him because it's not whole. That's real sick stuff.
Okay, the last question was asked before explaining industrial, and that is, from your vantage point, what should black people be aware of, be sensitive to right now in the wilderness of North America?
The important thing is to look at television and see the message, the subtopic message that is being put on the television. Let me give you an example. When the flood was down in New Orleans, when white people were coming out of stores with food, they said, oh, resourceful. These people are salvaging the food for survival. Black people coming out of the same store with food were criminals because they were stealing from the store and looting. One picture white, one picture black. When you watch television with your children, you begin to point out how the television is telling them different things. One of the things is, when you look at a mystery or something like that, who's the criminal? Who's selling the dope? Who's the bad guy? You can even see that in cartoons. They always have a bad guy. Well, then how do you connect that bad guy to people? And then when you also see other programs, whenever anybody sees anyone black, their unconscious fear is that he's there to threaten me, to kill me, to hurt me. That's why you have all these police shootings. Because they're afraid. And the only reason they are afraid is because they have been socialized by the television programming to think of blacks as dangerous. Every night you get the local body count. How many people killed each other? How many times have you heard something on television, you say, oh Lord, I hope they're not black.
Right.
Okay. So you see, that's programming. And you have to be mindful of how the media is programming.
The whole society is being programmed. The effects in the different segments is
Of the population.
of the population. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and Doc, the very last, because you talked about TV. These talk about shows like Maury Povich and Jerry Springer, what they do. Talk about Real Wives of Atlanta and what that kind of show does to our segment.
Well, what those shows do is when they see a black couple on any of those programs, or two or three of them yelling and screaming and fighting, they say, those are black people. That's what black people are. That's how they live. When the same ridiculous behavior comes and it's a white group of people up there acting silly, they say that person. They don't even say that white person. You see, we're always seen as a collective. We are, one person is all you black people. And when it's a white person, they don't even say white. How many times have you heard them say, this white man shot and killed so-and-so and so-and-so? They say, a man shot and killed 3 people. Mm-hmm. But they say, oh, the black man shot and killed 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how those differentiations are made. That's how you get the imprint. We are seeing anything that one person does is the whole race. How many times have you been in a situation, Leroy, where they ask you a question, because you're the only black person there, and like you're the black, and there you have to know the answer.
You're the black expert.
I went to high school. I was the only black in the high school, and anything that came up about black people, everybody asked me for the answer.
Right.
Because I represented all black.
Got it.
See the difference?
Yes, sir. Got it.
White people are individuals, and their behavior is that individual. We're seen as a collective. Oh, that's the behavior of black people.
Excellent. Thank you, dear brother.
You're very welcome.
Wait a minute.
And I wish all the grandmas and grandpas there a very successful radio programming.
Thank you. I have a question, Doctor.
Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about paranoid schizophrenic in the jails, and the paranoid schizophrenic. They like cut up or bite or whatever too.
There are different degrees. You can have a person who is in your family that's been classified by the thing as paranoid schizophrenic. And they just take their medication, and they think that they hear voices or somebody's talking about them. It doesn't go any further than that. What I was talking about, I'm talking about people who really, they get a definition, but they're really sick. You see, they're very disturbed.
I'm sorry, Doc.
Like
because I have a grandson that's they classified as paranoid schizophrenic. He's okay. Well, as long as he takes what they're saying is that he may hear voices.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on, Doc. What?
They did not say he didn't hear voices. I think they did. They classified him because he did this Y2K stuff.
Oh, the synthetic.
Marijuana.
The synthetic marijuana.
And he just stayed around the house, didn't do nothing. He would he would go outside, and he'd people would bother him because he didn't bother them, and he'd get into fights. He got into plenty fights, and they just put him in jail. And when he came out, they put him in Harlem Hospital psychiatric ward, and that's what they classified him as, paranoid scatter. I think it's easier for doctors to classify you as being that when they really don't know what's wrong with you.
Yeah, well, let me explain something to you. When people take drugs, they don't know what they're taking. And a lot of people who mix these chemicals together to sell never had an eighth grade education, never had a chemistry class, or any kind of measuring. They don't even know how to cook. To measure, when you cook, you have to measure a tablespoon, a teaspoon, and they don't even know that. So how can they take 2 bags of something, mix it to sell? And the reason that has damaged his brain. See, people think you can try it once and it's not going to hurt, but you don't know what you got. See, when you go to the pharmacy and pick up a drug, that drug is the same drug every single time. Each capsule has exactly the same amount of medication it's supposed to have in it. But when you walk to the corner and they give you that little bag with something in it, you have no idea whether it's rat poison in there, lye in there, or talcum powder. Because those people are just making money. And he, in all probability, took something that damaged his brain.
Okay.
You see? And so what happens is, when he gets into fights and things like that, they're trying to figure out why is he doing this. And the reason he's doing it is because he's been damaged. Now, when that classification of paranoid schizophrenic says, I hear voices, people are talking about me, or lots of times they don't hear voices, but it's like people are talking about me, or they don't like me, or they did this against me, or why did you move my brush, or did you take did you take the hair out of my brush and comb to do juju to me or voodoo to me? See, those are the paranoid parts. But that's not the people I'm talking about in the hospital for the criminally insane.
Okay.
See, that you don't have to wake up tomorrow morning thinking that he's going to cut you in half or something. No. You're safe.
Yeah, okay, 'cause I told his mama to keep his insurance paid.
So that's how his whatever he's smoking or taking.
All right.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you, doctor.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Everybody here at the table, some can say thank you loud,
Thank you
some
very much.
some are so subdued. You dropped the Washington D.C. bomb on us, and that's your job. That's a clinical therapy, right?
Okay.
All right. God bless you, there, brother.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye. Peace.
Daughter's dialysis.
You looked good on TV last night with Dr. Bowles.
Oh, you saw it.